The Gospel of Philip states, "When Eve was still with Adam, death did not exist. When she was separated from him, death came into being. If he enters again and attains his former self, death will be no more." This isn't about literal men and women, it's about psychological wholeness, the separation of masculine and feminine, of conscious and unconscious, of ego and shadow. This is the fundamental split that creates the experience of separation, suffering, and death. The reunion, the sacred marriage, the hieros gamos, as Jung called it, is the reintegration of these split aspects. Jung dedicated enormous energy to understanding this principle through alchemy, which he believed was transmitting Gnostic wisdom in coded form. The alchemical marriage, where the king and queen, sun and moon, sulfur and mercury unite, isn't about chemical processes. It's about the psychological integration of the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine. When these unite, when the psyche achieves this internal wholeness, the person is no longer split, no longer at war with themselves, no longer controllable through the manipulation of internal conflicts. This is liberation from the Demiurge's primary control mechanism, internal division. But here's what makes the Gnostic Jesus method particularly radical, and why Jung believed it was deliberately hidden. The Gnostic texts don't just teach liberation for the individual. They teach that each person who achieves gnosis and liberation weakens the Demiurge's overall power. The Gospel of Truth states, "He who has knowledge knows where he comes from and where he is going." But more than that, it teaches that gnosis is contagious, that awakened consciousness naturally awakens other consciousness. Jesus doesn't save people through his death. He awakens people through his teaching and his example. Each awakened person becomes a revealer for others. Jung saw this principle operating in what he called the collective unconscious. When one person individuates, when one person breaks free from collective conditioning and achieves psychological wholeness, it creates a pattern, a possibility, a template that makes it easier for others to do the same. It's not that they're copying the individuated person, it's that the individuated person's existence proves it's possible, and that proof registers in the collective psyche. This is why systems of control are so threatened by awakened individuals. It's not just that they've personally escaped, it's that their escape makes the prison visible to others and demonstrates that liberation is possible. The method Jesus taught, according to Jung's interpretation of Gnostic texts, can be summarized in practical psychological terms. First, achieve gnosis through direct confrontation with the unconscious. This means meditation, dream work, active imagination, any practice that breaks the dominance of ego consciousness and allows the unconscious to speak. Second, name and transcend the archons by making your complexes conscious. Identify the patterns that control you, the automatic reactions, the compulsions, the fears and desires that aren't actually yours, but have been programmed into you. Third, integrate the opposites through the union of internal masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow. This is the work of accepting all aspects of yourself, especially the parts you've rejected or denied. Fourth, recognize yourself as the divine spark, the self, not the ego. Shift your identity from the constructed personality to the totality of consciousness. And finally, help others awaken, not by preaching or converting, but by embodying liberation. In Jung's later work, particularly in his book Ion, he explored the figure of Christ as a symbol of the self. But he was careful to distinguish between the Christ of orthodoxy and the Christ of gnosis. Orthodox Christ saves you through belief and vicarious atonement. Gnostic Christ awakens you through teaching and example. Orthodox Christ maintains the power structure, the need for church, priest, intermediary. Gnostic Christ eliminates the intermediary and places the responsibility and the power directly within each individual. This is why the Gnostic texts were declared heretical. They're inherently anti-authoritarian. They place ultimate authority within each person's direct experience of the divine, not in external institutions or doctrines. And honestly, this is where the teaching becomes uncomfortable for people, because it removes the comfort of salvation through belief or through someone else's sacrifice. The Gnostic method requires work, requires consciousness, requires taking full responsibility for your own liberation. You can't be saved by believing the right things or following the right rules. You can only be liberated by doing the psychological work of making the unconscious conscious, of integrating what has been split, of awakening from the sleep of conditioned existence. Jung knew this made the teaching unpopular. People want to be saved. They don't want to have to save themselves. The Demiurge, understood psychologically, is every force that keeps you asleep and identified with limitation. It's societal conditioning that tells you who you should be. It's trauma that convinced you you're fundamentally broken. It's consumer culture that keeps you chasing satisfaction through external acquisition. It's political ideology that divides the world into us versus them. It's religious doctrine that places God outside and above, rather than within and throughout. It's the voice in your head that sounds like you, but is actually the accumulated programming of family, culture, media, education. All the systems that benefit from you remaining small, controllable, and asleep. Breaking the Demiurge's control means recognizing all of this as external imposition rather than internal truth. Jesus, in the Gnostic texts, repeatedly emphasizes that the kingdom of God is within, not coming in the future, not located in heaven after death, but present now, accessible now, if you know how to see it. In the Gospel of Thomas, he says, "The kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it." Why don't they see it? Because the Demiurge has convinced them to look everywhere except within, everywhere except now. The method to break this control is to reverse the gaze, to turn attention inward, to question every assumption, to examine every belief, to make conscious every unconscious pattern, until you find what was there all along, buried beneath the conditioning, the divine spark, the self, your actual nature beyond all the false identities.